Our next speaker is also Eric, but Eric Calabro from Eagle.
So my name is Eric Calabro. I'm with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. I'm the Inland Lakes Policy Analyst for our resource permitting program. So we do all of the permitting and compliance for construction-based activities wherever land meets water around the state. And today I'm really excited to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is building natural shorelines and how can we work with our existing landscapes to improve our lakes. You know, many of our lakes are, especially in southern Michigan, are more developed, and you know we've seen kind of a decline in our resources. And how can we make these lakes as good as they can be? um, so Eric covered a lot of these points really well. So I'm going to kind of breeze through some of these slides, but I'm just kind of laying a foundation of natural shorelines around our lakes, and native plants provide important functions and values. So Eric mentioned, you know, sediment stabilization and sedimentation and mitigating shoreline erosion and you know, a lot of these functions. But we also value natural shorelines as well for um, because they support a lot of the things that people like fishing and snorkeling and swimming and things along those lines. But what we're seeing is, I guess what we have seen over time is a change in our lakes. So, you know, this is a typical undeveloped northern Michigan lake where we have beautiful wetland shorelines, vegetated, woody structure in the water, floating plants, natural shorelines. And what we've seen over time is that lakes that look like this, providing good functions and values, get transformed into lakes that look like this, where we've lost those beautiful wetland shorelines that are providing all those benefits. They've been replaced with seawalls and hardened shorelines and mowed lawns to the water's edge, and you know, a heavily used landscape with boats and docks and you know, runoff from the street and things like that. And you know, these more developed systems have less woody structure and less vegetation cover and density than what our undeveloped shorelines do. And shoreline hardening, specifically, when we see it on more of a lake-wide scale, has a large amount of issues associated with it, with you know, the hard reflection of waves opposed to the, you know, gradual dampening of waves that we see with naturally sloped shorelines. So with that hard reflection of wave energy, we can get scouring of the lake bottom, erosion of neighboring properties, you know, sediment suspension, like what Eric was discussing, where you know those waves are bouncing off these hardened structures, and because there's really no submersed plants or nearshore plants anymore, that sediment is getting stirred up. We lose the habitat complexity, obviously, as a barrier for animal movement like turtles and things like that with hardened shorelines. And we often see increased lake energy because, you know, these waves are bouncing off all of the walls around the lake. So this is an example of this. This is the North Bay of Portage Lake in Livingston County, and this is an image from 1938. So you can see in this image the different textures of the vegetation on the ground. So you can kind of tell by the texture here, you know, all of this is wetland. This area here is also wetland. You know, we have some nice forested areas around. And what we've done over time to many of our lakes is transform them into this, where we have you know, much more heavy usage. We see elimination of these wetlands, you know, docks placed everywhere. And this didn't happen overnight, right? This was small incremental impacts over this, you know, 80-year or so period. And what kind of makes me step back a little bit is that, you know, this is just one person's lifetime, you know, from 1938 here, within 2020 to 2022, there are people around this lake that remember it in its previous state. So I think it really underlines the point of conserving small habitat fragments and you know, the merits of that. So Across Michigan, we've seen the impacts of the shoreline hardening, and there have been a lot of projects, especially over the last 10, 15 years, that have shown less impactful alternatives are available. And it's really about finding a balance. We're not trying to completely change people's aesthetic of what they want their properties to look like, or stop projects from happening, or anything like that. It's just we just need to try to do things a little bit better. And there's a lot more examples out there on the landscape now in Michigan to allow us to do that. And we've learned a lot about these techniques over the years. So how do we do it? So how do we build a natural shoreline? So we start by trying to mimic what we see successful, stable shorelines looking like in nature. So how do we mimic what we see in nature? What are qualities of a natural shoreline that we see on an undeveloped lake? So the foundation of this is shallow shoreline slopes that can support plants. Oftentimes we see slopes on a 20-foot vertical to one horizontal slope. But even when we're restoring shorelines, we really try and go for a one on four slope, for example. We also see tiers of vegetation, so grasses, flowers, shrubs, trees, aquatic plants, all tying together that shoreline. We see plants in the water. Wetlands are a tremendously valuable piece of inland lakes and lake ecology. And then also woody structure in the water. If you go to any undeveloped lake, you will see trees in the water, and they perform a lot of important functions. So the bottom lines here really are slope and the plants are central to the designing of natural shorelines. And it's really the plants that are protecting the shoreline here over time. So how do we create a healthier lake environment with these kind of general points in mind? So I'm going to go through some project examples now, and I split this next part of the talk up into two pieces. So the first piece is properties that are in need of shoreline protection, like this one. This is just mowed lawn to the water's edge. And then, what can people do that have existing properties with seawalls? It can be very expensive to remove a seawall, for example. So how can we make some small steps in properties that have existing shoreline hardening? So I'm going to start with properties that are in need of shoreline protection. So these are two main designs that we have that I see a lot around the state, where we have a coconut fiber log. And I guess I'll step back for a moment. There's a lower energy design and a higher energy design that are commonly utilized. So, depending on the wave energy, the boating activity, and things like that, different techniques can be used to facilitate native plant establishment. And that's what these designs are really all about. So we're using a coir log just to protect young plants as they're becoming established. And this coir log will eventually degrade over time. And then it will be the plants that are tying the shoreline together. And over time, you will never even know that a coir log was placed there. And then same thing with rock revetments. And in higher energy environments, a very low slope, that this 1-on-4 slope is used just to protect the plants. And then the plants over time will slowly move out over the rock and stabilize the shoreline. So we do have at Eagle some ways to learn if your shoreline is a higher energy shoreline. But here's a general example of what this looks like. So this is an eroded, a little bit of erosion on this shoreline. And I'm going to kind of go through time here a little bit. So this is the before pictures. And then here is shortly after a project was installed. And this is a higher energy project. So, and I want you to keep an eye on, here's the coir log, and I put yellow arrows just to orient you in the future pictures of where these locations are. So, and this is an arrow pointing at these two trees and an arrow pointing at the coir log. So here is a year or two into this project, and then a couple following years. So here's that arrow at that same tree. He lost his buddy along the way. And then I took this picture back in 2022, where you can see, you can't even really see the rock anymore. The vegetation is completely moved out right to the shoreline. And, here's the arrow, and then here's that tree. So this is the general idea of what we're going for. This is another picture of a lower energy design where this person did this project. I was talking with this person on their shoreline um, uh, uh, a few years ago, and he did this project with his son in a weekend on a relatively lower energy shoreline, staking in the core logs. He chose five workhorse plant species, like irises, Canada anemone, and some others, and it shored up his shoreline. On Eagle's shoreline protection website, there's a ton of examples, and I'm constantly trying to put up more and more as I visit more projects around the state of shorelines that have installed these bioengineering practices, and there's lots of different examples. So this is a steeper shoreline on a slope where they created a natural shoreline. Lower energy sites, higher energy sites. This is on Torch Lake. This image here, where they were able to naturalize a shoreline in a huge energy environment. Um, Shorelines in higher energy environments that also use woody structure and flowers, grasses. There's just a variety of different aesthetics for folks who want a more manicured look to a little bit more wild look. So you guys can explore that story map. In that story map, it gives a bunch of information about each project as well, like how much the project cost, what's the energy level, who did the work, what plants they used, what materials, and things like that. So with projects that are on existing properties with seawalls, for example, like this property, there's a few things you could do. So the first thing, I guess, I would suggest is, if it's possible, rip that sucker out of there. That may be not possible in certain circumstances, but that would definitely be the best thing to do. And here's a few ways to do that. So this is a concrete wall removal, and you can see the excavator in there was peeling back the shoreline. So with properties that have seawalls like this, we remove the wall and peel this shoreline back to create that slope, like I mentioned in the earlier slides. And this is a couple pictures of some folks doing that. That might be Eric Elgin on that excavator. I don't know. This is a picture of the finished project where you can see the hard reflection of waves on the seawall, and then the dissipation of waves here, and how some of the plants have begun moving out onto this revetment. So some other options, if you don't have the capacity to remove seawalls, is just trying to develop some small native gardens behind your existing shoreline structure. So that's what these pictures are showing. There's lots of ways to promote infiltration right behind your seawall, so we don't have a lot of that runoff coming in directly from the lake. So check out our shoreline protection website. There's a ton of information on there, example plans, fact sheets, and also please visit the Michigan Natural Shoreline Partnership. They have plant lists, other examples, and a lot of resources on their website as well.
All right. Thanks so much, Eric. That was awesome.